I transferred my pension to a brand new debit card that morning, thinking I was finally one step ahead of all the scams targeting people my age. By dinner, every dollar was gone. Not frozen, not pending, gone. And somehow my daughter Laura and her husband Jason showed up at my door before I even had time to process it, already talking like they knew exactly what had happened and what I should do next. That was the moment something inside me went cold, because this didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like a setup. If you're watching this, tell me where you are and what time it is. I read every comment. And if you've ever had someone you trust make you question your own reality, I want to hear your story. Please like and subscribe, because what happened next changed how I see family forever. My name is Christina Matthews. I'm 68 years old, and until recently, I believed I had lived a careful, sensible life. Not perfect, but steady, predictable. The kind of life where you pay your bills on time, keep receipts in labeled folders, and trust that if you do things the right way, things won't fall apart all at once. I live in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. It's the same house my husband Daniel and I bought over 30 years ago. Every corner of it still carries him his tools in the garage, his handwriting on old sticky notes, the worn recliner he refused to replace. When he passed 3 years ago, I didn't just lose my husband. I lost the one person who always stood between me and the world when things got complicated. Since then, I've been managing on my own. My income is simple Daniel's pension and my Social Security. It's not extravagant, but it's enough. I've always been careful with money. I don't gamble, I don't make impulsive purchases, and I certainly don't hand out my financial information to anyone, not even family. At least that's what I used to believe. My daughter Laura Bennett started coming around more often after Daniel died. At first I was grateful. She brought groceries, helped me with small things around the house, and checked in regularly. It felt like she was stepping into a role of support, the way daughters sometimes do when their mothers age. But slowly, something shifted. The questions started small. Mom, have you thought about consolidating your accounts? Do you know exactly how much you're getting each month? Are you sure your bank is secure? At first, I thought she was just being responsible, concerned. But over time, her tone changed. It became less about helping and more about monitoring, like she was keeping mental notes of everything I said. Her husband Jason was harder to read. Jason Bennett has a way of smiling that makes people trust him instantly. He's polite, well-dressed, always speaks calmly, but there's something underneath that I could never quite place. He asks questions that sound casual, but linger a little too long. So your pension gets deposited automatically, right? You ever thought about switching banks? Some of them have better fraud protection. Do you use your phone for banking or just the computer? At the time, I answered politely, never thinking much of it. He was family after all. And besides, I didn't give him anything sensitive. Just general answers, or so I thought. The decision to transfer my pension to a new debit card didn't come out of nowhere. For about 2 weeks before it happened, I noticed small things that made me uneasy. One afternoon, I found my mailbox slightly open. Not broken, just not fully closed. Inside, everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had touched it. Then a few days later, I received 2 emails from my bank about unsuccessful login attempts. They weren't dramatic alerts, just quiet notifications that someone had tried to access my account and failed. The location listed wasn't even nearby. That's when I decided I needed to be proactive. I went to my local branch in person. I spoke to a young teller who was patient and respectful. I told her about the alerts the mail concern and how I wanted to make sure everything was secure. She suggested issuing a new debit card, resetting my PIN, and adding extra verification to my account. It felt like the right move. Safe. Controlled. I remember walking out of the bank that morning with my new card in my purse, feeling proud of myself. Like I had handled something before it could turn into a real problem. What I didn't realize was that I had just triggered one. That afternoon, I was at home organizing paperwork at the kitchen table when my phone rang. It was Laura. "Hey, Mom," she said, her voice light but slightly rushed. "Just checking in. How are you?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," I replied. "Just went to the bank earlier." There was a pause. A small one, but noticeable. "Oh, everything okay?" "Yes," I said. "Just being cautious." "Got a new card issued." Another pause. Then she said, "That's good. That's really good. You activated it already." The question caught me off guard. "Yes," I said slowly. "Why?" "Oh, nothing," she replied quickly. "Just making sure you did it right. Sometimes those things can be tricky." I felt a faint tightening in my chest, but I brushed it off. "She helped me at the bank," I said. "It's all set." "Okay," Laura said. "Good. That's good." We hung up shortly after. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes, but something about it stayed with me. The way she asked. The way she paused. I tried to ignore it, but then about an hour later she called again. This time her tone was different. Sharper. More focused. "Hey, Mom," she said. "Quick question. Did you set up the card with your phone yet? Like for payments or anything?" "No," I said. "I don't use my phone like that." "Oh," she replied. "Okay. Just thought maybe you had." "Why are you asking me all this?" I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Because I care," she said quickly. "You know how many scams are out there right now. I just don't want anything happening to you." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "I appreciate that," I said, "but I'm being careful." "I know, Mom," she said softly. "I just worry." We ended the call again, but this time I didn't feel reassured. I sat there at my kitchen table staring at my phone, replaying both conversations in my head. How did she know I went to the bank before I even told her? Why did she immediately ask about the new card? Why did it feel like she wasn't just checking on me, but checking something I told myself I was overthinking it? She was my daughter. Of course she worried. Of course she asked questions. That's what family does. But deep down, something didn't sit right. And as I would soon learn, that feeling wasn't paranoia. It was the first warning sign I almost ignored. That uneasy feeling stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. I tried to go about the rest of my day as usual. I made myself a light lunch, folded a basket of laundry, even sat down with a book in the afternoon, but I kept losing my place on the page. My mind kept circling back to those 2 phone calls. Laura's voice, the pauses, the questions that came just a little too quickly, a little too specifically. Still, I told myself I was being overly sensitive. After everything that had happened in the past few years, losing Daniel, adjusting to living alone, it would make sense if I was just more cautious than before. By early evening, I realized I needed a few groceries. Nothing urgent, just milk, eggs, and a few things I'd forgotten earlier in the week. It felt good in a small way to get out of the house and do something normal. The store was only 10 minutes away. I took my time walking through the aisles, picking out items, exchanging polite smiles with people I recognized. It was all so ordinary that for a moment the unease faded, until I reached the checkout. I placed my items on the conveyor belt, chatting lightly with the cashier as she scanned everything. When she gave me the total, I reached into my purse and pulled out my new debit card. There was a brief flicker of hesitation as I handed it over. Not fear, just unfamiliarity. It still felt new in my hand. The cashier inserted the card and waited. A second passed, then another, and then she frowned slightly. "I'm sorry," she said. "It looks like that one didn't go through. Do you want to try again?" I blinked, confused. "That's strange," I said. "It's a brand new card." She nodded politely and tried again. This time the machine beeped almost immediately. "Declined." The word flashed across the screen in bold, unforgiving letters. For a moment I just stood there staring at it as if it might change if I looked long enough. "Oh," I said softly, heat rising to my face. That can't be right. Do you have another form of payment?" the cashier asked, gently lowering her voice just enough to spare me attention. I felt suddenly exposed, like everyone in line behind me could hear my heart pounding. "No, I hesitated. "Let me try one more time." She did, and again declined. I swallowed hard, my hands beginning to tremble. "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "I must have made a mistake activating it. I'll come back." The cashier nodded kindly and set my items aside. I walked out of the store without looking at anyone, my face burning with a mixture of embarrassment and confusion. I had never had a card declined in my life. Not once. As soon as I got to my car, I closed the door, locked it, and sat there for a moment gripping the steering wheel. Then I reached for my phone. My fingers felt clumsy as I dialed the number on the back of the card. The automated system took longer than usual to navigate, or maybe it just felt that way because my chest was tightening with every passing second. Finally, a representative answered. "Thank you for calling. This is Amanda. How can I assist you today?" "Yes," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I'm having trouble with my debit card. It was just issued this morning and it's being declined." "Let me take a look at your account," she said. "Can you verify your information for me?" I answered her questions, my heart thudding louder with each one. There was a pause as she pulled up my account. And then another pause. Longer this time. "Ma'am," she said slowly. "Are you aware of the recent transactions on your account?" I frowned. "What transactions?" There was a brief hesitation on the other end. "I'm seeing several transfers that were made earlier today," she said carefully. "Large amounts." My stomach dropped. "That's not possible," I said immediately. "I didn't make any transfers." "Well," she continued, "there were multiple transactions processed within the last few hours, including digital transfers and external payments." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the car. How much, I whispered. She told me the number, and for a moment I couldn't speak. It wasn't just a withdrawal. It wasn't a small unauthorized charge. It was nearly everything. Gone. My hands started shaking so badly I had to put the phone on speaker and set it down on the passenger seat. "That's my pension," I said, my voice barely audible. That's all I have. I understand this is distressing," she said gently. "We're going to open a fraud investigation immediately. I'm going to place a temporary freeze on your account and flag these transactions." "How did this happen?" I interrupted. "I just activated the card today. I haven't used it anywhere except..." I stopped. "Except the grocery store." "Except now." "I don't understand," I said, my voice cracking. "How could someone access it so fast?" "There are a few possibilities," she replied. "If the card information was compromised during or shortly after activation, it could have been added to a digital wallet or used for transfers. We'll investigate thoroughly." I closed my eyes, trying to process what she was saying. Compromised. Added. Used. All within hours. "Ma'am," she continued, "for your safety, I recommend not sharing your information with anyone and monitoring your account closely. We'll be in touch within 24 to 48 hours. I thanked her mechanically and ended the call. For a long moment, I just sat there in silence. Then I reached for my phone again, intending to call Laura. But before I could even unlock the screen, there was a knock on my car window. I jumped. My head snapped to the side. And there they were. Laura and Jason, standing right outside my car in the grocery store parking lot. My heart nearly stopped. I hadn't told them where I was. I hadn't told anyone. Slowly, I rolled down the window. Mom Laura said, her face already creased with concern. "We've been trying to reach you. Are you okay?" Jason leaned slightly forward, his expression calm but intent. "We heard something might be wrong with your account," he added. "We came as fast as we could." I stared at them, my mind struggling to catch up. "How? Did you know I asked?" Laura exchanged a quick glance with Jason, so quick most people might have missed it. Then she smiled just a little too brightly. "You called me earlier, remember?" she said. "I just had a feeling something wasn't right." My chest tightened. "A feeling." That was her explanation. Before I could respond, Jason spoke again. "Let's not stand out here," he said smoothly. "Why don't we go back to your house and sort this out? I can take a look at your phone, maybe see what happened." Something in his tone made my stomach turn. Not concern. Not urgency. Something else. Expectation. I hesitated. And in that hesitation, something shifted inside me. Because for the first time, the question wasn't just what happened to my money. It was, why do they already seem to know? I didn't answer Jason right away. I just sat there in the driver's seat, my hands still trembling slightly, my heart beating too fast for what should have been a simple conversation. Laura was watching me closely now, her expression soft, almost fragile, but something about it felt rehearsed, like she already knew what role she was supposed to play. "Mom," she said gently, lowering her voice, as if speaking to someone much older, much weaker. "You don't have to go through this alone." That word alone landed heavier than she probably intended. "I'm not alone," I said quietly. Jason gave a small, reassuring smile. "Of course you're not. That's why we're here." There it was again. Not we came because you called, not we were nearby, just we're here. Like they had been waiting. I took a slow breath and finally opened the car door. "Fine," I said. "Let's go home." The drive back was quiet. Laura insisted on following me in their car even though it was only a short distance. I noticed through the rearview mirror how closely they stayed behind me. Not aggressively, just enough to feel intentional. When we pulled into my driveway, Jason was out of his car before I even turned off the engine. "Let's get inside," he said, already walking toward the front door. I frowned slightly. "I have my keys." But Laura stepped ahead of me and opened the door, with her own key. I stopped for just a second. I had given her that spare key years ago, back when Daniel was still alive. It had always felt like a gesture of trust, of family. Now for the first time, it felt like something else. We stepped into the house, and I suddenly became aware of how different everything felt with them inside. The same living room, the same furniture, but the air felt heavier. Jason moved quickly toward the kitchen table, already pulling out a chair like he was settling in for a task. "All right," he said, gesturing toward my phone. "Let's take a look and figure out what happened." I didn't move. "I already spoke to the bank," I said. Both of them froze just for a fraction of a second. "Oh," Laura said, turning to face me. "What did they say?" "They said there were multiple large transfers made today," I replied, watching them carefully. "Within hours of activating the card." Jason's jaw tightened ever so slightly before he leaned back, crossing his arms. "Then it's definitely fraud," he said. "Happens all the time. Scammers are getting smarter." Within hours, I repeated, "That seems fast." "It is," he admitted smoothly, "but not impossible." Laura stepped closer to me, her expression shifting into something softer, almost sorrowful. "Mom," she said, placing a hand lightly on my arm. "You've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe you clicked something by accident, or I didn't." I cut in. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't take them back. I didn't click anything. I didn't give my information to anyone. I went to the bank, activated the card, and came home. There was a silence. Laura's hand slowly dropped from my arm. Jason cleared his throat. "Well," he said, his tone still calm but firmer now. "Either way, we need to act quickly. The sooner we get control of this, the better. Christina, why don't you give me your phone and I'll check your banking app, maybe contact support directly?" "No." The word surprised even me. Jason blinked. "I'm just trying to help. I know I said, though, I wasn't sure that was entirely true anymore, but I'd rather handle it myself." Another pause, this time longer. Laura's expression changed again, but not to sadness, to something closer to frustration. "Mom," she said slowly, "you don't understand how serious this is." "I do understand," I replied. "That's why I'm being careful." With all due respect, Jason added, his voice tightening just a little, "This might be more than you can manage on your own." That did it. Something inside me shifted quietly but firmly. More than I can manage, I had managed a household for decades. Managed bills, emergencies, illness loss. I had buried my husband and rebuilt my life from the ground up, and now suddenly I was being told I couldn't handle a phone call and a bank account. "I appreciate your concern," I said evenly, "but I'm not helpless." Laura let out a small, strained laugh. "No one is saying you're helpless," she said quickly. "We're just saying maybe you're not thinking clearly right now." The room went still. There it was. Not "you need help." Not "this is complicated." But "you're not thinking clearly." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Why would you say that?" I asked quietly. Laura hesitated. "Because," she said, choosing her words carefully, "you've been different lately." "Different how?" "You forget things," she said. "You get overwhelmed. You panic." I stared at her. "I went to the bank this morning," I said slowly. "I activated a new card. I tried to use it. It was declined. I called the bank and found out my money is gone." I took a step closer. "Tell me exactly which part of that sounds like confusion." Laura opened her mouth, but no words came out. Jason stepped in. "Christina," he said, his tone more controlled now, "no one is accusing you of anything. We're just trying to look at all possibilities." "All possibilities," I repeated. "Yes," he said, "including the possibility that something might have slipped your mind. It happens." I shook my head slightly. "No," I said. "Not like this." Silence filled the room again, thick and uncomfortable, and in that silence something else began to surface in my mind. Small moments, things I had brushed off before. A prescription refill that cost more than expected. An envelope from the bank that I remembered setting on the counter but never opening. Laura insisting more than once that I should simplify things by letting her help manage my accounts. Jason offering casually to set up my banking app after an update confused me a few weeks ago. At the time, I had been grateful. Now those memories didn't feel helpful. They felt connected, I looked at them, really looked this time, at Laura's carefully controlled expression, at Jason's steady, watchful eyes, and for the first time a thought crossed my mind that I didn't want to believe. What if this didn't start today? I swallowed hard. "I'm going to call the bank again," I said, "and I'm going to ask for a full report. Every transaction, every device used." Jason's shoulders stiffened. "That might take time," he said. "That's fine." Laura sighed softly. "Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I said quietly. "I think I've been making it easier than it should have been." Neither of them responded. After a few more tense minutes, they gathered their things. "We'll check in tomorrow," Laura said, her voice tight. Jason gave me a long look before following her out. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and suddenly the house was silent again. But it didn't feel the same. I stood there in the middle of the living room, my thoughts racing, my heart heavy with something I couldn't fully name yet. Not just fear, not just anger, something deeper, something more dangerous. Because for the first time, I wasn't just wondering how my money had disappeared. I was wondering how long I had been slowly losing control. Without even realizing it, I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I turned off the lights, lay down in my bed, and closed my eyes, but the moment I did, my mind started replaying everything over and over again. Laura's voice, Jason's insistence, the bank representative's words, multiple transfers, within hours. Every time I drifted close to sleep, I would jolt awake again, my heart racing, as if I had forgotten something important. By the time the sun began to rise, I gave up entirely. I made coffee I didn't really want and sat at the kitchen table staring at the same spot on the wall for what must have been an hour. There was only one person I trusted enough to tell everything to. My sister. I reached for my phone and dialed Patricia Collins. She picked up on the third ring. "Christina." Her voice came through steady and alert. "You're calling early. Is everything all right?" I hesitated. For a brief moment, I considered softening it, making it sound less serious, less frightening. But something inside me said no. "Patricia." I said, my voice quieter than I intended. Something's very wrong. There was no interruption, no immediate questions. That was Patricia. She always listened first. So I told her everything, from the bank visit, to the declined card, to the missing money, to Laura and Jason showing up before I even got home. I even told her about the conversation in my kitchen, about the way Laura had suggested I might not be thinking clearly. There was a long silence when I finished. Then Patricia spoke. "Christina," she said slowly, "I need you to stay very calm and listen to me carefully." My fingers tightened around the phone. "I am calm," I said. "Just tell me what you're thinking." Another pause, and then she said something that made my stomach drop. "Laura called me a few weeks ago." I froze. "What?" she asked me. Patricia continued, her voice steady but heavier now. "If I had noticed any changes in your memory. If you'd been forgetting things, getting confused." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. What I whispered. "I didn't tell you at the time," Patricia said, "because I thought it might just be concern, but it didn't sit right with me." The way she asked, it felt rehearsed. I leaned back in my chair, my hand covering my mouth. "She's been setting something up," Patricia said quietly. "And now, after what you just told me, it's starting to make sense." My chest tightened. "No," I said, shaking my head, even though she couldn't see me. "No, Patricia, this is different. This is fraud. This is someone stealing my money." "Yes," she said firmly, "and who benefits from you looking like you can't manage your own finances?" The question hung in the air, heavy, unavoidable. I didn't want to answer it, but I didn't have to, because we both already knew. I closed my eyes, my thoughts racing faster now. She thinks I'm losing my mind, I said softly. No, Patricia corrected. She wants other people to think that. That distinction hit harder than anything else, because it meant intention, planning, strategy. This didn't start yesterday, Patricia continued. This started weeks ago, maybe months. I swallowed hard. I've noticed things I admitted slowly, small things, money missing from my wallet once, bank mail that I remember seeing but then it wasn't there anymore. I thought I was just being forgetful. That's exactly what they want you to think, Patricia said. The words sent a chill down my spine. For the first time, everything began to line up in a way that made sense and terrified me at the same time. Laura's questions about my accounts, Jason's casual interest in how I handled my banking, the offer to help set up my phone app, the pressure to simplify my finances, the suggestion that I sell the house, and now the missing pension. I need to call the bank again, I said, sitting up straighter. I need more details. Yes, Patricia said immediately, and I want you to write everything down, every conversation, every strange moment, dates, times, anything you can remember. I will. And Christina, she added, her voice softening just slightly, you need to protect yourself. This isn't just about money anymore. I nodded slowly. I know. We stayed on the phone for a few more minutes, going over practical steps, what to ask the bank, how to document everything, who I might need to contact next. When we finally hung up, I didn't feel calmer, but I felt clearer, and sometimes clarity is more important than comfort. I called the bank again this time, asking to speak directly with the fraud department. After verifying my identity, I explained that I needed a detailed breakdown of everything that had happened. The representative this time was a man named Daniel. I understand you're requesting a full transaction timeline and access log, he said. Yes, I replied. I need to know exactly how and when my card was used. There was a pause as he pulled up my account. All right, he said. I can see that your card was activated at approximately 10:12 a.m. yesterday. That sounds right. Then he continued at 11:03 a.m. the card information was added to a digital wallet. I blinked. A digital wallet? I repeated. Yes, ma'am. Typically that means it was linked to a smartphone or payment app. My grip tightened on the phone. I didn't do that, I said firmly. I understand, he replied. That's why it's flagged as suspicious activity. I took a slow breath. What happened after that? There were several transactions between 11:15 a.m. and 2:30 p.m., he said. Multiple transfers including external payment services. All within hours, just like the first representative had said. Do you have any information about the device used? I asked. There was another pause. I'm not able to give you specific device ownership, he said carefully. But I can confirm that the same device was used consistently across all transactions. One device. Not multiple. Not random. Targeted. Planned. I closed my eyes, the pieces falling into place faster now. Someone had access to my card details almost immediately after activation. Someone who knew the timing. Someone who was ready. Is there anything else? I asked quietly. Yes, Daniel said. There's one more detail that might be relevant. My heart skipped. What is it? What is it? The digital wallet was verified using a one-time code sent to your phone number. I sat up straight. What? Yes, ma'am. A verification code was sent to your phone at 11:02 a.m., and it was entered correctly within seconds. I felt a cold wave wash over me. Within seconds. That meant whoever did this had access to that code. Or access to my phone. My mind flashed back to something I hadn't thought about since yesterday. Laura standing in my kitchen. Jason nearby. My purse sitting on the counter. My phone right next to it. Unattended. Just for a few minutes. My stomach turned. "Thank you," I said quietly. "That's very helpful." I ended the call and set the phone down slowly. The kitchen felt different now. Not just quiet, not just empty, but exposed. Because for the first time, I wasn't dealing with a faceless scammer. I wasn't dealing with some distant hacker or random criminal. I was dealing with someone who had been inside my home, someone who knew my routines, someone who had stood just a few feet away from me while taking everything. And as that realization settled in, one thought rose above all the others. This wasn't just betrayal. This was something far more deliberate, something that had been building quietly, right in front of me. That morning after my call with the bank, I didn't cry. I thought I would. I thought the weight of everything, the missing money, Patricia's revelation, the confirmation that someone had used my phone to authorize the theft, would finally break something inside me. But it didn't. Instead, something else took its place. Focus. Cold, steady, uncomfortable focus. For years, I had trusted instinct in small ways when something felt off, when a conversation lingered too long in my mind, when a person's tone didn't match their words. But like many women my age, I had also learned to dismiss those instincts, to be polite, to give people the benefit of the doubt. Not anymore. I walked slowly through my house, not as someone living in it, but as someone examining it, looking, noticing, questioning. The kitchen counter, the drawer where I kept small notes and receipts, the exact spot where I remembered placing the temporary pin the bank had given me. I opened the drawer. It wasn't there. I pulled everything out, old coupons, folded grocery lists, envelopes, but the small slip of paper with my handwritten pin was gone. I stood there for a long moment staring into that drawer. I remembered putting it there. I remembered thinking I would move it somewhere safer later. But I hadn't, and now it was gone. I closed the drawer slowly. "All right," I whispered to myself. "Let's stop pretending." I moved to the front door and opened the app connected to my doorbell camera. I had installed it a year ago at Patricia's suggestion, just in case she had said. I hadn't checked it in weeks. Now I scrolled back to the previous day. There she was, Laura, standing on my porch. But not at the time she had told me. Earlier. Much earlier. The timestamp showed she had arrived nearly 20 minutes before I came back inside from the backyard. She wasn't just dropping off soup. She was waiting. In the video, I watched her glance around once, then reach into her bag. I couldn't see exactly what she was doing, but she stepped closer to the door, close enough that I knew she was trying to stay just out of the camera's direct angle. Then after a few minutes, she straightened up and knocked. As if she had just arrived. My throat tightened. That wasn't concern. That wasn't coincidence. That was preparation. I replayed the footage 3 times, each time noticing small details I hadn't seen before. The way she checked her phone. The way she adjusted her posture right before knocking. The calmness. Too calm. I set my phone down and leaned against the wall, closing my eyes for a second. "Okay," I said softly. "Okay." My voice sounded steadier than I felt, but I wasn't done yet, because something else had been bothering me since my call with the bank. Jason. Specifically, a conversation from about a month ago. I had been sitting right here in the kitchen frustrated because my banking app had updated itself and the layout had changed. I couldn't find where to check my balance. Jason had been visiting with Laura that afternoon. "Oh, that happens all the time," he had said casually. "Here, let me take a look." I had hesitated, but only briefly. He was family. He took my phone, tapped through a few screens, and handed it back. "There you go," he said with a smile. "All set." At the time, I had been grateful. Now that memory felt different. Not helpful. Strategic. I sat down at the table, my heart pounding again, but not from fear this time. From realization. If he had access to my phone back then, if Laura had access to my house yesterday, if the pin was missing, then this wasn't just opportunity, it was coordination. I picked up my phone and called the bank again, asking if I could come in person. "Yes, of course," the representative said. "We recommend that given the situation. I'll be there within the hour," I replied. Before I left, I did one more thing. I walked to the front door and I locked it. Then I reached into the small bowl by the entryway, took out my spare key and placed it in my purse. Laura still had her copy, but that was about to change. At the bank, I requested everything. Printed transaction logs, device access summaries, any available timestamps tied to the fraud. The branch manager, a woman in her early 50s with a calm, measured demeanor, sat with me personally. "Mrs. Matthews," she said gently, "based on what you've described, I strongly recommend you file a police report." I nodded. "I intend to." And she added carefully, "You may also want to consider speaking with an attorney, especially if there's any possibility this involves someone you know." I met her eyes. "It does," I said. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. When I returned home, the house felt quieter than usual, but that quiet didn't last long. Because as soon as I stepped inside, I froze. The kitchen light was on. I was certain I had turned it off before leaving. Slowly, my pulse quickening, I set my bag down and walked forward. And then I saw her, Laura, standing in my kitchen, like she belonged there. She turned when she heard me, her expression shifting instantly into concern. "Mom," she said, "where have you been?" I was worried. I stared at her. "How did you get in?" I asked. She blinked as if surprised by the question. "With my key," she said. "You gave it to me. Remember?" Her tone was light, almost casual, but something about it made my skin crawl. "I didn't expect you to come back so soon," she added. That sentence hung in the air. "Not I was worried when you weren't here, not I just arrived. But I didn't expect you to come back so soon." My chest tightened. "What are you doing here, Laura?" I asked quietly. She stepped closer, her face softening again. "I told you," she said. "I'm worried about you." I didn't move. "I went to the bank," I said. Her expression flickered. Just for a second. "What did they say?" she asked. They confirmed everything I replied. The money, the transfers, the device used. She held my gaze, and she asked. And they also confirmed something else. I continued slowly. Her shoulders tensed slightly. What she said. I took a step forward. The transactions were authorized using a code sent to my phone. Silence. A long, heavy silence. Laura didn't speak, didn't react, just stood there watching me. And in that moment, for the first time, I saw it clearly. Not concern, not fear, not even guilt, but calculation. Careful, quiet calculation. And that was the moment I understood something I hadn't been ready to admit before. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't even desperation. This was something planned, something controlled, something far more dangerous than I had allowed myself to believe. And now I was standing alone in my kitchen with the person I could no longer trust. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between me and Laura stretched thin like something that might snap if either of us said the wrong word. She was still standing near the kitchen counter, her posture relaxed on the surface, but I could see the tension in her shoulders now, the careful stillness, the way she was watching me not like a daughter worried about her mother, but like someone trying to measure what I knew. I set my purse down slowly on the table. "You shouldn't be here," I said. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Excuse me, I didn't ask you to come over," I continued. "And I didn't tell you where I was." Her expression hardened for just a fraction of a second before softening again. "I was worried," she repeated. "You weren't answering your phone." "That's not true," I said calmly. "I spoke to you yesterday. Twice." Laura let out a small breath like she was trying to keep her patience. "Mom," she said gently, "this is exactly what I'm talking about." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "You're getting details mixed up," she said. "You're stressed." "Anyone would be." There it was again. That same subtle shift. Not arguing facts, reframing them, rewriting them. I felt something inside me tighten, not panic this time, but clarity. I remember very clearly I said, my voice steady, "You called me yesterday. You asked about my new card. Twice." Laura hesitated, only for a second. But it was enough. Then she smiled faintly. "Okay," she said. "Maybe I did. But that's not the point." "No," I replied quietly. "I think it is." Her smile disappeared. We stood there facing each other across the kitchen, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was speaking to my daughter. I felt like I was speaking to someone who had already decided what version of the truth she was going to tell, and was just waiting to see if I would go along with it. Laura crossed her arms slowly. "Mom," she said, her tone shifting firmer now, less patient. "You need to stop trying to handle this on your own." "I'm not alone," I said. "You are," she shot back. "You don't have Dad anymore. You don't have someone managing things with you, and right now you're clearly overwhelmed." "I'm not overwhelmed," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm being careful." "You're being paranoid," she corrected. The word hit harder than anything she'd said so far. Paranoid. I stared at her. "Is that what you think I asked?" She didn't answer immediately, but her silence was enough. "I think she said slowly that you might not realize how much you're struggling." A cold wave moved through me. There it was. Not just suggestion anymore. Not just concern. A narrative. Carefully built. Carefully delivered. "You've been forgetting things," she continued. "You've been misplacing items. You've been anxious and confused." I took a slow breath. "I've been robbed," I said. "That's what's happened. And I'm trying to help you deal with that," she said quickly. "But you won't let me." "I won't let you control it," I corrected. Her eyes flashed. "Control," she repeated. "You think I'm trying to control you?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked to the drawer in the kitchen and pulled it open. I moved aside the papers, the envelope showing her clearly. "My pin was in here," I said. "It's gone." Laura's expression didn't change. "I don't know anything about that," she said. I nodded slowly. Of course you don't. I closed the drawer again. Then I turned back to her. And the doorbell camera I added. That got her attention. What about it? She asked. I checked it this morning, I said. You came here earlier than you said you did yesterday. Silence. Her jaw tightened. I stopped by earlier, she said. So what? So you weren't just dropping off soup, I replied. You were waiting. For you, she said quickly. Because I knew you'd be back soon. No, I said softly. Because you needed time. The words hung in the air between us. Laura's breathing shifted slightly. Not faster, just different. Controlled. Measured. You're making this into something it's not, she said. And you're trying very hard to make it into something else, I replied. We stood there like that, neither of us moving. And then she made a mistake. A small one. But enough. If you had just let Jason help you yesterday, she said, her voice tightening, we could have fixed some of this already. The bank can reverse things faster if you act confused enough. She stopped. Too late. The words were already out. The room went completely still. I felt my heart slow down. Not race. Slow. Because in that moment something shifted from suspicion to certainty. I looked at her. Really looked at her. You know too much, I said quietly. Laura froze. I don't know what you mean, she said quickly. Yes, you do, I replied. You know how the transactions were handled. You know how the bank responds. You know exactly what to say. That's just common knowledge, she insisted. No, I said. It's not. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. And then I said the words I had been avoiding since this all began. How did you know my card was active? I asked. She didn't answer. How did you know to ask me about it yesterday? I continued. Still nothing. How did you get into my house before I came back inside? Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. And then, for just a second, the mask slipped. Not completely, but enough. Enough for me to see what had been hiding underneath all along. Not concern, not love, not even desperation, but something colder, something calculating, something that had been watching me, studying me, waiting. I felt something inside my chest crack, but not in the way I expected. Not like breaking, like separating. The part of me that wanted to believe her, and the part of me that finally understood. You need to leave, I said. Laura blinked. What, you need to leave my house? Mom. Now. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Something in it must have changed, though, because she stepped back slightly. Christina, she said, her tone shifting again, sharper now, less controlled. You're making a mistake. No, I said. I think I've been making one for a long time. She stared at me, searching my face. For hesitation, for doubt, for anything she could still use. But she didn't find it. After a long moment, she grabbed her bag. This isn't over, she said quietly. I didn't respond. She walked to the door, paused for just a second, then left. The door closed behind her, and just like that, the house was quiet again. But this time the silence felt different, not empty, clear. I stood there for a long moment, my hands resting on the kitchen table, my breathing steady. Then I walked to the front door, and I locked it, not just out of habit, but with intention. Then I picked up my phone and opened my messages. Jason had already sent one. Of course he had. I hesitated for a second before opening it, and as I read the words on the screen, I realized something else. This wasn't just about money anymore. It never had been. It was about control, and they weren't done trying to take it. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after Laura left, staring at my phone, reading Jason's message over and over again. It wasn't long. That was what made it worse. Christina, we need to talk. Laura is really upset. You're not seeing things clearly right now. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. No anger, no apology, no denial, just control, just positioning. The words weren't written like a concerned son-in-law. They were written like someone already preparing a narrative. You're not seeing things clearly. I felt something settle inside me then. Not fear, not confusion. Resolve. I didn't reply. Instead, I set the phone down, walked into the living room and sat in Daniel's old chair, the one place in the house that always made me feel grounded, safe. I stared out the window for a long time, letting everything replay not just the last 24 hours, but the last several months. All the little moments I had dismissed, all the times I had chosen to trust, and slowly something became undeniable. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't panic. This was a strategy, and if I didn't move carefully now, I would lose far more than money. I picked up my phone again and dialed the number the bank manager had suggested earlier. Rebecca Lawson. She answered on the second ring. Lawson and Associates, she said professionally. My name is Christina Matthews, I replied. I was given your number by the branch manager at First Union Bank. I think I may be dealing with financial abuse. There was no hesitation in her voice. Are you safe right now, Mrs. Matthews? The question caught me off guard. Yes, I said. I'm at home. Alone. Good, she replied. Tell me what's been happening. So I did. I told her everything. The new card, the stolen money, the digital wallet, Laura's questions, Jason's involvement, the spare key, the missing pin, the conversation in my kitchen. I didn't leave anything out, and when I finished, there was a brief pause. Then Rebecca spoke. Mrs. Matthews, she said calmly, what you're describing fits a very clear pattern. My grip tightened on the phone. What kind of pattern? Coercive financial control, she said, often combined with what we call preemptive competency framing. I frowned slightly. I don't understand. They're not just taking your money, she explained. They're creating a narrative that you're unable to manage your own affairs. That way, if you push back, or if this escalates legally, they can argue that you're confused, unstable, or vulnerable. My chest tightened. So this was planned, I asked. Yes, she said simply, and likely for longer than you think. I closed my eyes. That word again. Planned. I need to ask you a few questions, she continued. Have they ever encouraged you to give them access to your accounts? Yes. Have they suggested you simplify your finances or transfer control to them? Yes. Have they brought up concerns about your memory or mental clarity before now? I hesitated. Yes, I said quietly. My sister told me my daughter asked her about that weeks ago. Then this is very serious, Rebecca said. And you did the right thing by calling. I exhaled slowly. What do I do now? Her answer came without hesitation. We protect you, she said, legally, financially, and personally. For the first time since this began, I felt something close to relief. Not because the situation was better, but because I wasn't navigating it alone anymore. Over the next hour, Rebecca walked me through everything. Step by step, clear, precise, no panic, no dramatics, just action. First, she said we secure your financial accounts. Any account that could be accessed needs to be locked down or transferred. I've already frozen the main one, I said. Good. We'll go further. New credentials, new verification methods, and no shared access under any circumstances. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Second, she continued. We document everything, every interaction, every message, every irregularity you've noticed over the past year. I've started doing that, I said. Excellent. That will matter more than you realize. She paused briefly. Third, we establish legal boundaries. What does that mean, I asked. It means updating your will, revoking any prior permissions, and making it very clear legally that no one has authority over your finances or personal decisions. My throat tightened. You think they'll try to take that, I asked. I think, she said carefully, they may attempt to escalate this if they feel they're losing control. The word control echoed in my mind again. And finally, she said we do not confront them directly anymore. That surprised me. Why not, I asked. Because right now they don't know how much you know, she explained. That gives you an advantage. If you confront them too early, they'll adjust their story. They'll become more careful. I leaned back in my chair. So what do I do? You remain calm, she said. You let them believe you're uncertain, vulnerable even. And in the meantime, we gather everything we need. I let that sink in. It went against instinct. Every part of me wanted to confront Laura, to demand answers, to force the truth into the open. But Rebecca was right. This wasn't just emotional anymore. This was strategic. All right, I said finally. I understand. Good, she replied. I'd like to meet with you in person as soon as possible. We'll formalize everything and start building your protection plan. We scheduled a meeting for the next morning. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time staring at the quiet room around me, the same house, the same life. But everything felt different now. Sharper, clearer, more fragile but also more defined. I stood up slowly and walked to the front door again. I looked at the lock. Then I walked to the hallway closet and pulled out a small toolkit Daniel had left behind. Within 20 minutes, I had removed the old lock and replaced it with a new one I'd bought months ago but never installed. It wasn't complicated, just something I had kept putting off. Until now. When I finished, I tested it twice. Locked, secure. No spare key outside of my control. As I stepped back, I felt something shift inside me again. Not fear, not grief, something quieter, stronger. For the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. And as I turned off the lights that night and headed toward my bedroom, one thought stayed with me more than anything else. Laura and Jason thought they were in control. They thought I was confused, vulnerable, easy to manage. They had no idea that I had just started fighting back. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. Not from anxiety this time, but from purpose. There's a difference. Anxiety keeps you frozen, circling the same fears over and over again. Purpose moves you forward, even if the ground beneath you still feels uncertain. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the notebook I had started the night before. On the first page, I had written one simple line: "Everything I remember matters." And for the next hour, I wrote dates, conversations, small incidents that had once seemed too insignificant to question. The time Laura insisted I didn't need to keep paper statements anymore and offered to help set everything up digitally. The afternoon, Jason casually asked how much was left on the mortgage on a house that had been fully paid off for years. The moment I found an opened bank envelope in the trash that I never remembered opening. At the time, each of those things had been easy to dismiss. easy to explain away. Now they felt like pieces of something much larger, something deliberate. By the time I closed the notebook, my hands were slightly unsteady, but my mind was clear. This hadn't started yesterday. This had been building, slowly, quietly, and I had almost let it continue. At 10 a.m., I arrived at Rebecca Lawson's office. It was a modest building just outside the city center, clean, professional, and reassuringly quiet. Nothing flashy, nothing intimidating. Inside, Rebecca greeted me with a firm handshake and a calm, direct gaze. "Mrs. Matthews," she said. "I'm glad you came." "Thank you for seeing me," I replied. We sat down in her office, and within minutes she had everything organized. Documents, notes, a structured plan. It was the first time since this began that I felt like I was part of something controlled instead of chaotic. "Let's go over what we know," she said. I handed her my notebook. She read silently for a few minutes occasionally, making small notes of her own. When she looked up, her expression was thoughtful but not surprised. "This confirms a pattern," she said. "Not just opportunistic theft, but ongoing financial grooming." "Grooming," I repeated. "Yes," she said. "Gradually positioning themselves to gain access, influence your decisions, and eventually control your assets." The word made my stomach tighten. "Control. Again." "They weren't just waiting for a chance," I said slowly. "They were creating one." "Exactly." She leaned forward slightly, "And based on what you've documented, this has likely been happening for at least a year." "A year." I swallowed hard. "How did I not see it?" I asked quietly. Rebecca didn't hesitate. "Because they didn't want you to," she said, "and because you trusted them." That answer didn't comfort me, but it made sense. We spent the next hour going through specific steps: legal protections, financial safeguards, documentation strategies. Rebecca helped me draft formal statements confirming that no one had authorization over my accounts or personal decisions. We updated my will, clarified asset ownership, and established clear legal boundaries. Every step felt like reclaiming something I hadn't realized I was losing. But then Rebecca paused. "There's something else we need to prepare for," she said. I looked at her. "What they may escalate," she said. "In what way they may attempt to file for conservatorship or guardianship," she explained, "especially if they feel you're pulling away from their control." My chest tightened. "You mean?" "Legally claim I can't manage my own life." Yes, the word hung in the air like a threat. "They've already started laying the groundwork," she continued. "The comments about your memory, the suggestion that you're confused. That's not random." I felt a cold chill run through me. "So what do we do?" "We prepare," she said. "Medical records, financial records, witness statements if necessary. We make it very clear that you are fully competent." I nodded slowly. "And in the meantime," she said, "you do exactly what we discussed. You don't confront them. You don't reveal what you know. You let them believe their narrative is working." That part still felt unnatural, but I understood it now. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about protecting myself. When I left Rebecca's office, I felt different. Not lighter, but stronger. Because for the first time, I had a plan. That afternoon, I met Patricia for lunch. She hugged me the moment she saw me. "You look tired," she said. "I didn't sleep much," I admitted. We sat down and I told her everything Rebecca had said. The legal risks, the pattern, the possibility of guardianship. Patricia listened carefully, her expression growing more serious with each detail. "I knew something wasn't right," she said quietly. but I didn't realize how far they might go. Neither did I. I keep thinking about Laura, I said softly, trying to understand how she got here. Patricia reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Christina, she said, this isn't about one moment. This is about choices she's been making over time. I nodded, though it didn't make it easier to accept. She's not the same person I said. No, Patricia replied, but she's still responsible for what she's done. That truth settled heavily between us. We talked for another hour, going over everything, making sure I hadn't missed anything important. Before we left, Patricia squeezed my hand again. You're doing the right thing, she said, even if it doesn't feel like it. I smiled faintly. I hope so. That evening, I returned home and checked my phone. 3 missed calls, all from Laura, and 1 new message from Jason. I opened it slowly. We're getting concerned, Christina. You're shutting us out, and that's not healthy. We need to talk about next steps before this situation gets worse. I stared at the message for a long time. The wording, the tone. It wasn't a request. It was pressure. Subtle. Controlled. But unmistakable. Next steps. As if they were already planning something. I set the phone down without replying. Because now I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about theft. It was about positioning, control, narrative, and they were still trying to shape it. But now, so was I. I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street. Everything looked the same. Neighbors walking their dogs, cars passing by, ordinary life continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Because for the first time, I wasn't just reacting to what they were doing. I was seeing it, understanding it, and preparing for what would come next. By Sunday morning, the story had already begun to spread. I didn't hear it directly at first. Not from Laura, not from Jason. I heard it in the way people looked at me. Church had always been a place of quiet comfort for me. Familiar faces, warm greetings, a sense of belonging that hadn't changed even after Daniel passed. It was one of the few places where I still felt anchored. That morning, as I walked through the front doors, something felt different, subtle, but unmistakable. Conversations paused just a second too long when I passed. A few people smiled, but their eyes lingered on me with something I couldn't quite name, concern or doubt. I took my usual seat halfway down the aisle, trying to focus on the service, but my mind kept drifting, picking up on every small shift in energy around me. Then during the fellowship break, it became clearer. Christina, a woman from my Bible study group, said gently, approaching me with a careful smile, "How are you feeling today?" The question itself wasn't unusual, but the tone was soft, measured, like she was testing something. "I'm fine," I replied. She nodded slowly. "That's good. That's really good." There was a pause. Then she added, "Laura mentioned you've been going through a stressful time." There it was. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my expression calm. "Yes," I said. "There's been a situation with my bank account." "I'm so sorry," she said quickly. "That must be very confusing." Confusing. The word landed quietly, but it echoed loudly in my mind. "Not confusing," I corrected gently. "Just serious." She smiled again, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, I'm glad Laura is there to help you through it." I nodded, though something inside me recoiled. "She's certainly involved," I said. The woman hesitated, then excused herself. And just like that, I understood. Laura had started talking. Not loudly, not dramatically, but carefully, planting ideas, shaping perceptions. I stayed through the rest of the service, but I didn't hear much of it. My attention was pulled elsewhere, watching, listening, noticing. That's when Margaret Ellis approached me. Margaret had always been quiet, observant, the kind of person who spoke only when she had something meaningful to say. "Christina," she said softly, taking the seat beside me. "Margaret," I replied, relieved to see a familiar face that didn't feel uncertain. She looked at me for a moment before speaking. I heard something she said. I turned slightly toward her. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, she admitted. "But after what I've been hearing this morning, I think you deserve to know." My heart began to beat a little faster. "Know what?" Margaret glanced around briefly before lowering her voice. "A few weeks ago, I was at a restaurant downtown," she said, "just having lunch with a friend." I listened closely, and at the table behind us, she continued, "I heard a man talking, loud enough that it was hard not to notice. Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. He was saying," she went on, "that by summer he'd have everything taken care of, that the house would be signed over, and that it was just a matter of handling things the right way." My breath caught. "Did you see who it was?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "It was Jason." The world seemed to narrow for a moment. Just a little. Not spinning, not collapsing, just focusing. "And you're sure?" I asked quietly. "Yes," she said. "I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed he was talking about something else. But now, with what I'm hearing—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "Thank you," I said softly. Margaret placed her hand gently over mine. "I don't know everything that's going on," she said, "but I know what I heard, and it didn't sound like concern. It sounded like planning. Planning. That word again. It was everywhere now, in every detail, every memory, every piece of information that had once seemed disconnected. "I appreciate you telling me," I said. She nodded, then stood. "If you need someone to speak up," she added quietly. "I will." I watched her walk away, my thoughts moving quickly now. Because this changed something. Not emotionally, strategically. This wasn't just my word anymore. There was a witness, an independent voice, someone outside the situation who had heard something that confirmed what I already suspected. And that mattered. More than anything Laura could say at church. More than any carefully planted suggestion. Truth, when supported, becomes harder to dismiss. When I left the church that morning, I didn't feel ashamed. I didn't feel confused. I felt aware. Aware of the narrative being built around me, and aware that I now had the means to challenge it. When I got home, I called Rebecca immediately. "I have something new," I said as soon as she answered. I told her everything Margaret had shared. There was a brief pause on the other end. "That's significant," Rebecca said. "Very significant." "Because it shows intent?" I asked. "Exactly," she replied. "It supports a pattern of premeditation, not just financial exploitation, but a plan to acquire your property." My grip tightened on the phone. "My house," I said, quietly. "Yes," she confirmed. "And combined with the financial activity, it strengthens your position considerably." I exhaled slowly. "What should I do?" "For now, document everything," she said. "Write down exactly what Margaret told you. Dates, context, wording." "I will. And Christina," she added, her voice steady, This is likely going to escalate soon. I know. They've already started shaping the narrative socially, she said. The next step is often legal. A cold wave moved through me. You mean the guardianship? Yes. I nodded slowly. Then we'll be ready. When I ended the call, I sat quietly for a moment, letting everything settle. The church, the conversations, Margaret's statement, Jason's words. It was all coming together now. Not in pieces, but in a clear, undeniable picture. This wasn't about helping me. This wasn't about concern. This was about control. And they had already started trying to take it. But now I wasn't standing alone in confusion. I was standing with evidence, with support, with clarity, and for the first time since this began, I wasn't just defending myself. I was preparing to expose the truth. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, plain, official, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with paper. I knew what it was before I even opened it. Some instincts don't need confirmation. Still, my hands trembled slightly as I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out the documents inside. At the top of the first page, in bold, unmistakable lettering, were the words, "Petition for temporary conservatorship." I didn't sit down. I didn't cry. I just stood there in my living room reading line after line as if I were looking at a stranger's life being described. Subject exhibits signs of cognitive decline. Demonstrates impaired financial judgment. Vulnerable to external manipulation and fraud. Each sentence felt carefully constructed, not emotional, not exaggerated, just precise, calculated, designed to sound reasonable, convincing. And at the bottom, Laura Bennett, my daughter's name. My chest tightened, but something inside me refused to break, because by the time this arrived, I was ready. I picked up my phone and called Rebecca. "It came," I said simply. "I'll be right over," she replied. Less than an hour later, Rebecca was sitting across from me at my kitchen table, the documents spread neatly between us. She read through them once, then again more slowly. "They've done their homework," she said. I let out a quiet breath. "It looks official." "It is," she said. "But that doesn't mean it's accurate." She tapped a section of the document. "They're framing you as financially irresponsible and cognitively unstable. They're using the stolen money as evidence. That they stole, I said." "Yes," she agreed. "Which is why their timing matters. They're trying to establish control before the fraud investigation fully unfolds." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the papers. "They're trying to get ahead of it." "Exactly." Rebecca looked at me directly. "But they made a mistake." I met her eyes. "What kind of mistake?" "They assumed you wouldn't be prepared." A small, steady breath left my chest. For the first time since opening that envelope, I felt something shift. Not fear, confidence. "We're going to respond immediately," Rebecca continued. "And thoroughly." Over the next 2 hours, we built our response. Every piece of evidence, every documented moment, every inconsistency in their claims. Rebecca organized it all with a precision that felt almost surgical. Medical records confirming my cognitive health. Bank logs detailing the fraudulent transactions. Device data linking the activity to a single external source. Jason's messages carefully worded, subtly threatening. Patricia's statement about Laura questioning my mental state weeks earlier. Margaret's account of Jason discussing plans to take my house. And my own documentation pages of notes, dates, observations. It wasn't just a defense. It was a narrative. The truth. Structured. clear, unavoidable. By the time we finished, the stack of documents on my table had doubled. Rebecca closed her folder and looked at me. "How are you holding up?" she asked. I considered the question for a moment. "I thought I would feel worse," I admitted. "Angrier, more hurt. And I feel focused," I said. She nodded. "That's good. You'll need that." The hearing was scheduled for the following week. 7 days. 7 days to prepare. 7 days to stay calm. 7 days to let them believe their version of the story was still intact. That night I didn't sleep much, but it wasn't fear keeping me awake this time. It was anticipation. The next morning I received a message from Laura. "Mom, I didn't want it to come to this. We're only doing this because we're worried about you. Please don't fight it." I stared at the words for a long time. There was no apology, no acknowledgement, just justification and control. I didn't respond. Later that afternoon, Jason called. I let it go to voicemail. His message came through a few minutes later. "Christina," his voice said, calm and measured. "This is for your own good. You don't need to go through this alone. Just cooperate and we can make this easy." Easy? The word made my stomach turn, as if handing over my life would be a kindness. I deleted the message, because now I understood something clearly. They weren't trying to fix anything, they were trying to finalize it. Over the next few days, everything moved quickly. Rebecca coordinated with the court, filed our response, submitted evidence, arranged for expert verification of my cognitive state. Every step was deliberate, strategic, and quiet. We didn't announce anything. We didn't react publicly. We let them continue believing their narrative was working. But behind the scenes, everything was shifting. The night before the hearing, I found myself in Daniel's workshop. I hadn't been in there much since he passed. It still smelled faintly of wood and machine oil the way it always had. His tools were exactly where he left them, untouched. I ran my hand along the workbench, remembering the countless hours he had spent there building, fixing, creating. He had always been steady, practical, grounded. And as I stood there, I remembered something he used to say whenever something went wrong. People show you who they are when they think you can't push back. At the time, it had seemed like simple advice. Now it felt like truth. Because Laura and Jason thought I couldn't push back. They thought I was confused, vulnerable, easy to control. And in that belief, they had revealed everything. I stood there for a long moment, letting that realization settle. Then I turned off the light and walked back inside. The house was quiet, still, but no longer uncertain. Tomorrow would change everything, not just legally, but emotionally, because tomorrow, I would stop being the person they thought I was and become the one they never expected. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not just in temperature, but in feeling. Quiet, controlled. Every sound seemed sharper, more deliberate. The shuffle of papers, the low murmur of voices, the faint echo of footsteps against polished floors. I sat beside Rebecca, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my back straight. I had chosen my outfit carefully that morning, simple, professional, unmistakably composed. A navy blouse, tailored slacks, and the same calm expression I had practiced in the mirror before leaving home. Across the room, Laura and Jason sat together. Laura looked different, still polished, still controlled, but her eyes carried something I hadn't seen before. Tension. Jason, on the other hand, looked exactly the same, calm, confident, almost relaxed, like he believed this would go exactly as planned. For a moment I watched them, and for the first time since this began, I didn't feel hurt. I felt distance. Because the people sitting across from me no longer felt like family. They felt like opponents. Rebecca said quietly beside me, "Remember? Just speak clearly. You don't need to prove anything emotionally. The facts will do that for you." I nodded. "I understand." The judge entered a few minutes later, and the room rose briefly before settling again. The hearing began. Laura's attorney spoke first. He was composed, articulate, and careful with his words. Everything he said was structured to sound reasonable, concerned, measured. "Your Honor," he began, "this petition is not about control. It is about protection." I almost smiled. The irony was almost too precise. He went on to describe me, or rather the version of me they had created. A woman struggling with memory lapses, increasingly anxious, unable to manage her finances responsibly, vulnerable to fraud. At one point, he referenced the missing pension funds as evidence of poor financial judgment. That was the moment Rebecca leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "Stay steady." I did, because I understood what was happening. They weren't just telling a story, they were constructing a reality, one that made their actions seem necessary, even compassionate. When Laura took the stand, the performance became more personal. She looked at the judge, her expression soft, her voice carefully measured. "I love my mother," she said. "I've only ever wanted to protect her." Her voice wavered slightly at the right moments. Her posture shifted just enough to suggest vulnerability. It was convincing. I'll give her that. If I hadn't lived through the past weeks, I might have believed her. She spoke about my confusion, my stress, the way I had become overwhelmed by simple financial tasks. She described the incident with the bank as something I couldn't fully understand. Every word was chosen carefully, nothing exaggerated, just enough to sound believable. And then Rebecca stood. The shift in the room was immediate. Where Laura's attorney had been smooth and persuasive, Rebecca was precise, controlled, unyielding. "Your Honor," she began, "we do not dispute that a significant financial event occurred. What we dispute is the cause and the intent behind this petition." She moved methodically through the evidence, one piece at a time. No rushing, no emotion, just facts. Bank records showing the timeline of the transactions, the digital wallet activation within an hour of the card being issued, the verification code sent to my phone and used immediately. Mrs. Matthews did not authorize these actions, Rebecca stated clearly. However, the transactions were executed using a device that consistently accessed the account during that window. She paused. "And that device has been linked to the respondent's household." A ripple of quiet movement passed through the room. Jason shifted slightly in his seat. For the first time, he didn't look entirely comfortable. Rebecca continued. She presented my medical records, clear recent evaluations confirming full cognitive function, no signs of decline, no impairment, no confusion. Then came the statements. Patricia's account of Laura questioning my mental state weeks before the incident. Margaret's testimony about Jason discussing plans to take control of my home. Each piece was small on its own, but together they formed something undeniable. A pattern, a plan, a strategy. By the time Rebecca finished, the room felt different, heavier, more focused. And then, it was my turn. I stood slowly aware of every movement, every breath. I walked to the stand and sat down, meeting the judge's eyes directly. "Mrs. Matthews, the judge said you may speak." I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told the truth. I went to the bank to protect my account. I began, because I had concerns about security. I followed every recommended step. I explained the timeline, the card activation, the declined transaction, the call to the bank, the discovery of the missing funds. And then I spoke about Laura, not with anger, not with accusation, but with clarity. My daughter began asking questions about my finances. Weeks before this happened, I said. Questions that at the time I believed came from concern. I paused briefly. I no longer believe that. The room was silent. I continued. She suggested I might be forgetting things, that I wasn't thinking clearly. She made those statements before any financial issue occurred. I let that settle. After the money was taken, she and her husband arrived at my home before I had told anyone what had happened. They encouraged me to hand over control of my phone. They suggested I was confused. I looked directly at the judge. "I am not confused." The words were simple, but they carried everything. "I am careful," I continued. "I am aware, and I have taken every step necessary to understand what happened to me." I took a slow breath, and what happened to me was not a mistake. Silence filled the room, not tense, not uncertain, just clear. When I finished, I returned to my seat beside Rebecca. The judge reviewed the documents briefly, then looked up. Her expression was measured, neutral, but decisive. "This court finds no evidence to support the claim that Mrs. Matthews is unable to manage her own affairs," she said. My chest tightened, but I stayed still. "The petition for conservatorship is denied." A quiet exhale left my lungs, but she wasn't finished. Furthermore, the judge continued, "The evidence presented raises serious concerns regarding the financial transactions in question. This matter will be referred for further investigation." That was it. No drama, no raised voices. Just a decision. Clear. Final. And as the room began to shift, people standing, papers moving, I looked across at Laura for just a second. And in that moment, everything became undeniable. Because she wasn't crying. She wasn't relieved. She wasn't even surprised. She was angry, not at what she had done, but at the fact that it hadn't worked. And that told me everything I needed to know. The hallway outside the courtroom felt louder than it had any right to be. Voices overlapped. Shoes clicked against tile. Papers rustled. It was the kind of noise that usually fades into the background, but not that day. That day, every sound felt sharp, almost intrusive, like my senses had been turned up too high after holding everything in for so long. I stayed seated for a moment after the judge's decision, letting Rebecca gather the documents. My hands were steady, but my chest felt hollow. Not empty, just quiet. "We did exactly what we needed to do," Rebecca said, placing a reassuring hand on my arm. "This is a strong outcome." I nodded. "I know." And I did know, but knowing something and feeling it are two very different things. We stepped out into the hallway together, and that's when I saw Laura. She was standing near the far wall, her arms crossed tightly, her face rigid. Jason stood beside her, his expression no longer smooth or confident, just tense. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Laura walked toward me, fast. "Are you happy now?" she demanded, her voice low but sharp. Rebecca stepped slightly forward, but I shook my head. "No," I said calmly. "I'm not happy. That seemed to catch her off guard. "Then what is this?" she snapped. "You just stood in there and made me look like a criminal." I held her gaze. "I didn't make you look like anything," I said quietly. "I told the truth." Her eyes flashed. "Your version of the truth," she shot back. "No," I replied. "The one supported by evidence." Jason stepped in, then his tone controlled but edged with irritation. "This didn't have to go this far, Christina," he said. "We were trying to help you." I turned to him slowly. "You tried to take legal control of my life," I said. "That's not help. That's protection," he insisted. "From what I asked." He hesitated. And in that hesitation, everything spoke louder than any explanation he could have given. Laura's voice cut in again. "You've ruined everything," she said, her composure slipping. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I studied her face carefully. There were no tears, no regret, only anger. "You filed a petition to declare me incapable," I said. "You tried to take control of my finances, my home." Her lips tightened. "You forced us into that position," she said. The words landed heavily, not because they were true, but because she believed them, or had convinced herself she did. That was the most unsettling part. "You had a choice," I said quietly. "Every step of the way, you had a choice." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Not guilt, but something close to it. Then it disappeared. "This isn't over," Jason said. His tone had changed completely now. No more politeness, no more careful phrasing. Just a statement, a warning. Rebecca stepped forward this time. "It is for today," she said firmly, "and I strongly advise both of you to consider your next steps very carefully." Jason held her gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then he looked back at me. "This will come back around," he said. I didn't respond, because I knew something he didn't. It already had. They turned and walked away together, their footsteps echoing down the hallway. I watched them go, feeling something shift inside me again. Not relief, not victory, something quieter, final. "They're not finished," Rebecca said beside me. "I know," I replied. "But they've lost their leverage," she added. "And that matters." I nodded. It did matter, more than anything, because for the first time I wasn't standing on uncertain ground. I was standing on truth. A few days later, something happened that changed everything again. Ethan called me. My grandson. He hadn't spoken much throughout all of this. Quiet, withdrawn, always in the background when Laura and Jason visited. "Grandma?" His voice came through hesitant. "Ethan," I said softly. "Are you okay? I need to talk to you," he said. "Can I come over?" "Of course," I replied immediately. He arrived that afternoon. He looked different, tired, not physically but emotionally, like he had been carrying something heavy for too long. We sat in the living room, the same place where Laura and Jason had once stood trying to convince me I couldn't trust myself. Now it felt different, safer. Ethan didn't speak right away. He just sat there, his hands clasped together, staring at the floor. "It's okay," I said gently. "Take your time." He swallowed hard. "I heard them," he said finally. My chest tightened. Heard who I asked, though I already knew. "Mom and Jason," he said. "A few weeks ago." I stayed very still. "What did you hear?" He hesitated, then forced the words out. "They were talking about you," he said. "About the house." A cold weight settled in my chest. "What about it?" they said. "Once everything was done, we'd move in," he continued. "That it would be easier that way." Everything inside me went quiet. Not shocked. Not surprised. Just confirmed. "They said it would be handled by summer," he added softly. The same words Margaret had heard. The same plan. Just from a different angle. "They talked about the money too," Ethan said. "About how they needed it. And how you wouldn't even notice." I closed my eyes briefly, not because I didn't want to hear it, but because I needed a second to steady myself. "There's more," he said. I opened my eyes. "What is it?" He looked up at me then, and for the first time I saw something in his expression that broke my heart. Guilt. "They used my college fund," he said. The words landed like a blow. "What?" I whispered. He nodded, his voice shaking now. "I overheard them arguing about it," he said. "Jason said they'd replace it once everything went through. But Mom said it didn't matter because they'd have the house anyway." I felt my throat tighten, not just from what they had done to me, but from what they had done to him. "This wasn't just about me," I said slowly. Ethan shook his head. "No," he said. "It wasn't." He wiped his eyes quickly, clearly trying to hold himself together. "I didn't know what to do," he admitted. "I didn't think anyone would believe me." I reached over and took his hand. "I believe you," I said softly. And I meant it, because now the final piece had fallen into place. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a pattern. A way of thinking, a willingness to take from anyone, even their own son. I pulled Ethan into a gentle hug, feeling the weight of everything settle in a new way. Not just betrayal, but clarity, because whatever doubt had remained was gone. After Ethan left that afternoon, I sat in the living room for a long time without moving. The house was quiet again, but this silence felt heavier than any before it. Not because I was alone, but because I finally understood the full weight of what had been happening. Not just to me, to him. To a 16-year-old boy who should have been thinking about school friends, his future not sitting across from his grandmother, confessing that his parents had used his college fund like it was disposable. I looked down at my hands, still remembering the way his fingers trembled when I held them. They'd replace it once everything went through. That's what Jason had said, as if my home, my life, was just a transaction waiting to be finalized. Something shifted in me then. Not anger, not even sadness. Something quieter, stronger, a line. Clear, unmovable. They hadn't just crossed it, they had erased it entirely, and now it was my turn to redraw it. The following week, things began to move quickly, faster than I expected. Rebecca called me early Monday morning. "They're starting to turn on each other," she said without preamble. I sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" Jason's attorney reached out, she explained. "He's trying to distance himself from the transactions, suggesting Laura was the one who initiated everything." I let out a slow breath. "And Laura?" "She's doing the same," Rebecca said. Blaming him. Claiming she didn't fully understand what was happening. I closed my eyes for a moment. Of course they were. For months, maybe longer, they had worked together, aligned, coordinated, and now the moment pressure was applied. That unity collapsed. "They're trying to protect themselves," I said. "Yes," Rebecca replied. "Which means we're in a strong position." That word again. Position. This entire situation had been about positioning from the start, but now for the first time, I wasn't the one being positioned. I want to move forward, I said, not just defensively. There was a brief pause. Good, Rebecca said, because we can. Over the next several days, we did exactly that. Formal complaints, civil recovery actions, additional documentation submitted to support the fraud case. Every step was deliberate, measured. There was no rushing, no emotional decisions, just clear, structured action. And slowly, piece by piece, things began to shift. Not everything, but enough. Some of the stolen funds were recovered, not all, but a portion significant enough to matter, enough to show that what had been taken wasn't beyond reach. More importantly, legal protections were put firmly in place. My accounts, my home, my decisions. Everything was now clearly, legally, undeniably mine. No ambiguity, no access, no room for manipulation. And with that came something I hadn't felt in weeks: stability. But not everything could be fixed that way. Some things couldn't be recovered, like trust. Laura didn't contact me again directly, not after the court, not after the investigation began to move forward, but I heard things. Through Rebecca, through Patricia, through the quiet network of people who always seem to know more than they say. Their situation was deteriorating, financially, emotionally, personally, arguments, blame, pressure building in ways they couldn't control anymore. It wasn't satisfying to hear. It wasn't justice in the way people imagine it. It was just consequence. And consequence doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it just looks like things falling apart slowly, in the exact places they were built on unstable ground. Jason reached out once more, through his attorney, requesting a private meeting, trying to resolve matters quietly. I declined, not out of anger, but out of clarity, because there was nothing left to resolve privately. Everything that needed to be said had already been revealed. Ethan continued to visit me every weekend. At first he was quiet, careful, like he wasn't sure what was safe to say, or how much space he was allowed to take. But slowly that changed. We started small, cooking together, watching old movies, working in the backyard. Simple things. Normal things. The kind of things that remind you life still exists outside of conflict. One afternoon, we planted tomatoes in the garden Daniel used to take care of. Ethan knelt in the dirt, carefully placing each plant as if it mattered. And it did, more than he probably realized. This used to be Grandpa's favorite thing I told him. He nodded. Mom never liked getting her hands dirty, he said absent-mindedly. I paused for a moment, then smiled faintly. Some people don't, I said. He looked up at me then. Are you mad at her? He asked. The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. I thought about it carefully. I'm not angry, I said slowly. That was true. Anger had passed. What remained was something else. What are you, then? He asked. I met his eyes. I'm done pretending things are okay when they're not, I said. He nodded quietly as if he understood more than I expected. I don't want to go back there, he said after a moment. My chest tightened. You don't have to decide anything right now, I told him gently. You just need to focus on yourself. He looked relieved, and that was enough. That night after he left, I sat at the kitchen table again, the same place where everything had started to unravel. But now it felt different. Not heavy, not uncertain, just mine. I looked around the house, at the walls, the furniture, the quiet spaces that had once felt invaded, and I realized something important. They hadn't taken everything, not even close, because the most important things, my awareness, my voice, my ability to stand my ground, those had never been theirs to take. And now, they never would be. It's strange how a house can feel completely different without anything physically changing. The same walls, the same furniture, the same creak in the floor near the hallway that Daniel used to promise he'd fix one day. And yet months after everything that happened, my home felt quieter in a way I hadn't experienced before. Not empty, not lonely, peaceful. That was something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The investigation continued in the background, moving at its own slow, methodical pace. Rebecca kept me informed when there were updates, documents processed, statements reviewed, proceedings advancing, but I no longer lived in that constant state of waiting, because my life had begun to move forward again. On my terms, my routines returned first. Morning coffee by the window, a walk through the neighborhood in the early evening, Sunday service. Yes, I went back. The first time I felt the eyes again, the whispers that weren't really whispers, but something had changed. Not in them, in me. I didn't lower my gaze. I didn't rush past conversations. I didn't try to explain myself, because I understood something I hadn't before. The truth doesn't need constant defense when it's already standing on solid ground. Margaret sat beside me that morning just as she had before. No hesitation, no distance, just quiet support. And slowly over time, others followed. Not everyone. Some people held on to their uncertainty, their quiet judgments. But that didn't matter as much anymore, because I had stopped measuring myself through their understanding. Ethan became a steady presence in my life. Every weekend turned into something we both began to rely on. We didn't talk about his parents often, not because it was being avoided, but because it didn't define everything anymore. We talked about school, his plans, what he wanted for his future. One afternoon, he told me he was thinking about studying engineering. "Your grandfather would have liked that," I said with a smile. He smiled back. I think so too. There was a lightness in him now that hadn't been there before. Not complete, not untouched, but healing, and that mattered more than anything else. A few weeks later, I opened the mail and found a letter from Laura. Not legal, not formal, handwritten. I recognized her handwriting immediately. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Then I opened it. The words were careful, not emotional, not apologetic in the way I might have once hoped. She wrote about things being complicated, about misunderstandings, about how she hoped that someday we could talk again. But there was something missing, something important, accountability. There was no acknowledgement of what she had done, no ownership of the choices she had made, just distance, and a quiet attempt to reopen a door that had never been properly closed. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I set it aside, not thrown away, not responded to, just set aside. Because I understood something now that I hadn't fully grasped before. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing. You can let go of anger without reopening the door to harm. You can wish someone well, without allowing them back into your life in the same way. That realization didn't come with relief. It came with clarity. And sometimes clarity is the most powerful form of peace. That evening, I stood in the backyard watching the sun dip lower behind the trees. The garden was growing. The tomatoes Ethan and I had planted were beginning to take shape, small, green, full of promise. I bent down and touched one, gently feeling the firmness of it between my fingers. Life continues. That's what it reminded me. Even after disruption, even after betrayal, even after everything changes, life continues. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the quiet, letting the weight of the past month settle into something that no longer felt overwhelming. Just part of my story, not the whole of it. Inside, my phone buzzed softly. A message from Rebecca. Everything is progressing as expected. I'll update you next week. You did well, Christina. I smiled faintly. Not because of the case, not because of the outcome, but because of what it represented. I had done something I never thought I would need to do. I had stood up, not just against strangers, but against my own family, and I had not lost myself in the process. That mattered more than anything. I turned off the porch light and stepped back inside, locking the door behind me, not out of fear, but out of habit, out of choice, out of ownership. This was my home, my life, my decisions, and for the first time in a long time, they felt entirely my own again. There is a kind of pain that only family can cause, not because they are stronger than anyone else, but because we lower our guard around them. We trust more, we question less. We assume love will always act as a boundary, but sometimes it doesn't. And when that trust is broken, the hardest part isn't just what was taken. It's what we have to rebuild inside ourselves. This story isn't just about money. It's about awareness. About recognizing that kindness does not mean surrender, that love does not require silence, and that setting boundaries even with the people closest to us is not cruelty, it is self-respect. For anyone watching this who has ever been made to feel confused, too sensitive, or difficult for protecting yourself, you are not wrong, you are not overreacting, and you are not alone. The strongest thing you can do is trust what you see, even when others try to rewrite it. And remember this. Forgiveness is a choice, but access is a privilege. And not everyone who hurts you deserves both. If this story resonated with you, I would really love to hear your thoughts. Would you ever forgive a child after something like this? And where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Please share your story in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because sometimes the truth we need to hear is the one someone else was brave enough to share.